Welcome back. And remember, we're basing our giveaway today on meaningful engagement. So be sure to engage in the chat, comment, and also ask questions. And just a reminder, we're giving away these four books on autism. I hope everyone can see them. And we're also giving away two premium passes to next year's conference. And that's for the person who's the most meaningful, engaged person here today. So next up is our interview with Dr. Temple Grandin. We'll just take a minute or maybe possibly two just to set up the interview there, and Steve will bring Temple on the stage. Thank you. Hello, Temple. How are you today?
I am just fine. How about yourself?
Yeah, great. We're doing really well here in Cork, Ireland. So I'll just do a small, quick introduction, Temple, and we can get started if that's okay.
Okay.
Great. So today I'm chatting with world-renowned autistic spokesperson, best-selling author, inventor, professor of animal science, Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's really great to be here.
That's great to hear. And Temple, when you look back in your life, what were the best and worst parts of being autistic?
Well, the worst part was bullying and teasing in high school. I managed to get through elementary school without being bullied because my teacher, Mrs. Deach, explained to the other kids I had a handicap that wasn't visible like a wheelchair and that they needed to be helping me. But high school was horrible. And the only places I was not bullied was where I had friends through shared interests in things like electronics and riding horses. The bullies did not participate in those activities. I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting kids involved with shared interest things. Might be music. Okay, there was one boy playing a trumpet. It might be art. It could be computer programming or robotics. It could be a whole lot of different things. Best time of my life, I had a good childhood. We spent lots of time playing in the woods, building things. Kids today don't do enough hands-on stuff. When I was in elementary school or primary school, what made school good was art class, sewing class, woodworking class. I think one big mistake a lot of schools have made is taking those hands-on classes out. Those are the things I liked doing the best when I was a kid.
And you describe yourself as thinking in pictures and as also a visual learner, Temple. Can you explain what this means?
Well, everything I think about is a picture. Now, if you watch the HBO movie Temple Grandin, it shows exactly how I think. Pictures flash up. I don't think in words. I think in pictures. And when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I didn't realize my thinking was different. I've since learned there's really kind of three kinds of thinking, then maybe some mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. I think in pictures, and scientifically, this is called an object visualizer. And a lot of artists. Also, a lot of skilled tradespeople that do the real high-end skilled craftsmanship kind of work, like do metal work where they read drawings or they fix cars. They're really smart at that. Then you have mathematical minds. They're the visual spatial. They're the computer programmers, the engineers. And then you've got your word thinkers, of course. And there's actual research, and some of that research is outlined in my book, The Autistic Brain, which I saw you giving away. I really appreciate that. We need to start working on what the kid can do. When I was 8 years old, my ability in art was really encouraged. And then my design business in the cattle industry, I used my art ability.
And Temple, when you look at the intensive speech therapy you had when you were younger, would you recommend this for children today?
Absolutely. I was in early intervention by the age 2.5. I was nonverbal, screaming, had all the full symptoms of autism. You've got little kids, and I want to emphasize 2, 3, 4-year-olds that don't talk. You can't wait 2 years for a diagnosis. You got to work with them now. And the therapy is going to be pretty much the same regardless of the diagnosis. And I want to emphasize getting enough one-on-one teaching with an effective teacher. Okay, so what's an effective teacher? An effective teacher gets more speech, more skills, things like addressing. Also, I was very pleased that the previous speaker emphasized turn taking, because that was a very big part of my training. How to take turns at games, how to wait and take your turns. And then she was talking about sit at the table and do round robin, taking turns talking. Let me tell you, that was standard 50s upbringing for all children. And those kind of things really helped me. I had to learn how to take my turn. I couldn't always just do stuff my way.
And Temple, if you were writing a letter to your 16-year-old self, what advice would you give?
My 60-year-old self, give to my young kid self. Well, let's say my 60-year-old self, with the knowledge I have now, was, a kid today. One of the problems I'm seeing is us visual thinkers can't do algebra. And I'm seeing kids just screened out. And I worked with a lot of brilliant people when we were building these great big food factories. They couldn't do algebra either. They're building whole big, gigantic plants. And it's kind of two parts of engineering. There's the visual thinking, and then there's the more mathematical part. And I talked to a parent down in the Southeast. Their kid couldn't graduate from high school. And they said, what are we going to do with them? I said, I'll tell you what you do. See that Amazon warehouse? Get a job in there. Learn every job on that floor. You know what you can do 15 years from now if you're really clever? You can design the next one. I have seen people do that in the food industry. Learn every job and then gravitate over towards the maintenance department. There is a back door, but you're going to have to work your butt off. You're going to have to learn every job on that floor. And I've seen this kind of backdoor in many, many different industries. I mean, I was totally backdoor going into the cattle industry. I'll tell you right now, being a woman in a man's industry in the early 70s, much worse than autism ever was. What I had to do is I had to make myself really good at what I did. That's what I did. And when you're weird, what you got to do is you got to sell your work. So I can show you some pictures of some of my work. I'll hold that right up to the camera. I hope that's good and clear. But I basically would show my work to clients. That's what I would do. And that's how I dealt with interviews, because I was in a field where I could show pictures and drawings of stuff that I did. But I see a lot of people kind of give up. The only reason I know that so many backdoors exist is I've worked in industry. In fact, I worked with construction for 25 years. Supervising projects I've been built, and we worked with brilliant people that just started out, the entry-level job and worked their way up.
And Temple, how do you process people's words, gestures, and tones?
Well, I have to learn it. The one thing was easiest for me was tone of voice. I actually liked using the telephone because I didn't have to worry about their face. I just had to listen to their tone of voice. And I could tell whether they were pleased with what I did or whether they were mad. But I had some good coaches that just explained to me when I made social mistakes. You can't be vague with these kids. Or I'd say, let's say I'm teaching somebody on the spectrum just retail job in a store. Okay, well, I would just tell them, watch how Susie interacts with a customer and copy that. You have to coach them like they're being in a play. Also, everything is learned by specific example. It's bottom-up thinking. So how do you learn to generalize? Well, you got to load enough data into the database. In fact, it's the same way that artificial intelligence thinks. You load enough information into the database so you can sort it into different categories. When I was a little child, I sorted dogs, cats, and horses by size, small, medium, and large. Well, that didn't work when a dachshund came into the neighborhood. I remember studying a dachshund, trying to figure out why she wasn't a cat. So then I had to find features she shares with dogs, such as barking. But you got to get these kids out doing things. There's a tendency to overprotect them too much. I would have never been in the cattle industry if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch. Now, we've got to get them out doing things. And the one thing you got to be careful about is working memory. If I was a computer, I'd be an Intel 286 with a little tiny memory, but huge amounts with a little tiny processor. So I can't multitask. Don't put me on the takeout window at McDonald's. That's going to be a disaster. But other kinds of jobs, like design work, that doesn't put any load on working memory. Also, I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. So if I have to do a job like take apart some machine makes ice cream or something like that, just give me a pilot's checklist of the steps to take it apart, the steps to clean it, and the steps to put it together. Don't try to verbally make me remember the sequence.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, do you find it easy to recognize emotions in other people, such as anger, sadness, and happiness?
Well, yes, I can recognize that. The thing I don't recognize is, like subtle things. I've learned now how to pick that up. And I've also learned that in most people, their emotions and their thoughts are all merged into one. And I've noticed a lot of people can't be objective about things. Let's just take something like judging somebody's research project. I will reference research projects, some people that I don't like as people, because their science was good. But I've noticed a lot of people can't separate the quality of their science from whether or not they like or hate the person. That's something that's actually quite easy for me to do.
And Temple, what motivated you to achieve so much in your life?
Well, it's, I don't know, that's a hard thing to say. People with autism tend to get fixated on things. And when I went out to my aunt's ranch, I got kind of fixated on a cattle chute. So then I started going to every feed yard in Arizona. And that opened up more doors. I kind of figured out very early on that certain people could open doors. There's a scene in the HBO movie where I go up to the editor of our farm magazine and I get his card, because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would open up a lot of career doors. One of the things that motivated me when I was probably 18 and 20 is I wanted to prove to people I was not stupid. That was a very, very big motivator for me when I did the dip vat projects that were shown in the HBO movie. People thought I was stupid. They didn't think I'd amount to anything. I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. And in the beginning, that was a really big motivator. And then I got motivation from designing something and it works. The client's happy with it. Animals are getting treated better. That's also a motivator. When I was a little kid, I liked to make things, and I liked getting praised when I made something really nice. But Mother didn't praise me for just having good table manners. That was expected in the 50s. She praised me when I did a really outstanding art project, something really worthy of praise. But I get a lot of motivation now out of problem solving. I get a lot of motivation when someone writes to me and says they read something in one of my books, or I said something in my talk, and now their kid is got a job and loving it because of something I told them. That turns me on. I like seeing real results happen. The other big problem I see with autism is you've got such a big range now since they changed the diagnostic guidelines. You're going from half of the people that make technology. Let me tell you about the different kinds of minds in technology. Okay, we're on StreamYard.com. I've been on lately some really, really dreadful platforms. And I'm looking here at Streamline, and there's nothing here, StreamYard, and there's nothing here I have to learn. It doesn't have all this garbage all over it and weird features that you don't need. That's because probably a visual thinker designed the interface, but you need the mathematicians to do all the coding. But when the coders design the interface, they're completely horrible, and then they want to spend an hour teaching me how to use them, which I really don't care to do. And there's a reason why StreamYard and Zoom have got all the business, because people don't have to learn how to use them, and people don't want to learn how to use them. They just want to use them. Yeah, it's this is one of my big things now is how different minds work together. There's two parts of design and engineering. The interface is one part of it, but all the good coding in the world isn't any good if your interface is so horrible that nobody can use it. So you need to have both. I can't do the coding, but I really love this interface because it's so obvious. It tells you exactly how to use it without all kinds of weird extra features on it.
Thanks, Temple. And what are the main challenges you now face as an adult, Temple?
Well, just getting older. I can't physically, do the things I used to be able to do. COVID's been really challenging. I can't, we can't even visit a meatpacking plant now. We're just so worried about getting sick there. All my travel's been canceled. I have not been on a plane since March 12th. And I had to change a lot of things. And let me tell you some things that helped me. Get up in the morning, get dressed for work, showered every day, ready for work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Don't be slouching around in what you're sleeping. I find that makes me feel better. And I had to get a new project. I'm working now on some more things about how people think. I'm working on another book right now. And because I got to have stuff to do. So I got some big book projects lined up. Because otherwise I'd be completely bored. I've been doing lots of conferences and talks on the internet. These are all things I've done because I had to replace all the airplane trips with something else. I don't know, all the airlines are going broke right now. It's a real mess.
And Temple, how important is effective communication for autistic individuals who are nonverbal and even verbal?
Well, you have someone who's nonverbal, they got to have a way to communicate because they're going to, act out and have tantrums and hit and stuff. They can't communicate. Got to communicate. You got to make sure they don't have a hidden painful medical problem that they can't tell you about. You always got to rule that out. If you get a sudden change in behavior on somebody who's nonverbal, it's been good, now all of a sudden he's horrible, and he's only communicating with some little simple board thing. You have to make sure he doesn't have a toothache or an earache or something like that. That would make you behave badly. See, this is the other problem in autism, is that when people ask me questions about it, they overgeneralize. Little kids that are not talking, I can give you kind of a general answer. But someone like me as a teenager needs a very different support than maybe someone who's nonverbal. Now, this brings up the whole thing of work skills. Well, in the 50s, kids did chores. When I was 8 years old, this is what they did in our neighborhood. This is 50s upbringing. Every kid in the neighborhood, when the parents had a party, had to put their good clothes on and greet the guests and act as little caterers. Now, obviously, we didn't serve alcohol. We just served the snacks. But that taught social skills. And then all the party people would, introduce themselves to me. I was expected to shake hands with them. Every kid had to do that. That's an easy thing to do. And we had to sit at the table and have table manners. One thing that's helped a lot of people in my generation, especially ones that had no speech delay, was an old-fashioned 50s upbringing where this stuff was just taught to all the kids. And it was taught to me.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, how can a parent or a professional help, say, a non-verbal individual communicate their needs to avoid behaviors of concern?
Well, let's say we're no longer trying to teach them language, really, so we got to give them something else to communicate with. Some nonverbal people can learn to type completely independently. Now, I certainly would have that option out there. A tablet will work better than a laptop or a desktop, and let me tell you why. Because when you type on the virtual keyboard, the print appears right next to the keyboard. So you don't have to do a tension shift. Remember, slow processor speed. On a laptop, the print appears up on the top of the screen. So laptops are terrible. And if you're using a desktop, that'd be kind of cumbersome. One teacher years ago put the keyboard up on a box so that the print would appear next to the keyboard. So you don't have to do this. So probably a tablet, text messaging program. You can probably find those for free if you just look around. Put it on text messaging, put it on airplane mode so they can't actually send the texts. And they can pass the tablet back and forth. Or it can be something as simple as a board with pictures of different things on it. Piece of cardboard. It can be something that simple. It can be a little sign language. The only disadvantage of sign language is the other people around them have to be trained to use it. Where a board with pictures on it, he points to a drink, other people are going to know what that is. But they've got to have a way to communicate basic needs. I would strongly recommend getting this book if you're working with nonverbal older children and adults. It's Tito Mukapetahe, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? It's available on Amazon as an electronic book. Another book that's really good is a sequel to The Reason I Jump. That's written by a little Japanese boy. He's older, And in both of these books, they describe a sensory disordered world where seeing is a pixelated mess like a satellite TV going bad, hearing's cutting in and out like a bad phone. And this is one of the reasons why they touch and smell things, because those senses actually still work. So that's why they touch and smell stuff. But those books would give you great insight. And both of those people type completely independently. Nobody's touching them. They're not touching them, and they're not touching the thing that they type on.
Thanks, Temple. And what do you think of music and drama therapy as a way to help social interaction and communication?
Oh, I think that can be really good. Some people really help with horseback, horse activities or animals. I mean, all of these things are good because it all involves friends who are shared interest. That's a really important thing, because you're working with people with your shared interest, then you're going to seem a lot less weird. Those are all really good things. See, a person with autism is a bottom-up thinker, where a verbal thinker is top-down, a lot of vague, generalities. Bottom-up thinking, you take a lot of specific examples and you fill the database. Then my database is sort of like a spreadsheet, and I can sort those different things into different categories, like different degrees of good or bad, for example. They get black and white thinking. Well, Mother Teresa would be goodness way beyond something like holding a door open for somebody. Now, holding a door open is a nice thing to do, but it's not Mother Teresa. You can do the same thing with badness. Okay, robbing a bank is less bad probably than killing somebody. Let's say I put gum on the teacher's chair. Well, it might be just mischievous. You see, there's like degrees of something is good or bad, but you have to have specific examples. And when I say those specific examples, I actually see them. Actually, I'm seeing in 4th grade, the boys put a garter snake in Mrs. Coleman's notebook. That would be like the gum on the teacher's chair. See, it's not abstract. I was reading some stuff today about some very abstract philosophy, and I'm going, I don't understand this.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, some autistic individuals can be very sensitive and empathetic and pick up nonverbal cues very well. How important is it that parents and professionals are aware of their own behavior as well as their gestures?
Well, yeah, it's just like animals can pick up cues. They know when the suitcases are coming out or the dog carrier is coming out, it's going to be trouble. They pick up on those kind of cues. Some parents thought their kid had some magic power. No, they just saw that you get your purse and the car keys, then they know that you're leaving. Now, the thing is, but bottom-up thinking is a really important concept to understand. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to get them out doing a whole lot of things so you can fill that database. Then they can sort specific examples into different categories, like in a spreadsheet in their head. That's the way computers think. That's the way computers diagnose medical problems. Read x-rays. Let's say lung cancer, for example. You show it several thousand lung cancer x-rays, and then you show it x-rays of other stuff that are normal, other stuff wrong with it that's not lung cancer. It learns to categorize lung cancer from not lung cancer, for example. That's bottom-up thinking.
And Temple, what do you think is the best way to ease social anxiety for autistic individuals?
Well, you got to do it. When I gave my very first talk when I was in graduate school, I panicked and walked out. You just have to do it. What you got to do with these kids is you got to stretch them, but you don't throw them in over their head. I call it throwing them in the deep end of the pool. You don't do that. Like you don't, for a first job, shove them on a super chaotic takeout window. That's something you don't do. Or a store that's just chaos during the Christmas rush. That's something that you just don't do. But you have to stretch and give choices. I remember when my boss wanted me to call up a magazine to get an article about one of their construction projects in a magazine. I was scared to do it. He made me do it. I got the article in the magazine. You know, you've got to push a little bit. Got to push a little bit. And I call it stretching. It's not just forcing them into something that will be completely awful. When I was a teenager, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. Mother gave me a choice. I could go for a week and come home, or I could stay all summer. I got out there and I loved it. If I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I wouldn't have been in the cattle industry. So that brings up another thing. Students get interested in stuff they get exposed to. And I'm seeing way too many kids getting addicted to video games. What I'm saying right now to a lot of smart kids that are fully verbal, get out and get a job and have a life, or they're playing video games in the basement somewhere.
And Temple, do you think the lack of understanding of an autistic individual's needs contributes to behaviors of concern?
Well, yes, especially in somebody that's nonverbal. They've got to have a way to communicate. They also sometimes know where they can throw a tantrum and get out of doing something. Because the problem I've heard lots of times, you might have a kid who's good at school and terrible at home. Or you get vice versa, really good at home. Well, they know where they can get away with stuff and where they can't get away with stuff. My mother and the school worked together. I threw a tantrum. The penalty was no TV for one night. Now, the only exception to that was loud noise. We went to the circus and they had these cannons that went off, and that hurt my ears and I started screaming. She didn't punish me for that. That was sensory. But there was no sensory issues in my classroom. And kicking and screaming on the floor, you know, it had a penalty. One of the problems I'm seeing with a lot of this stuff is way too much overgeneralization. Now, there's a complicated social stuff I still don't do. I don't do bar scene. And I haven't gotten married because I've seen too much marital abuse, and I had an uncle that was a really bad alcoholic. When he was sober, he was nice, and when he was drunk, he was a horrible, swearing horribleness.
And Temple, what do you see as the function of these behaviors?
Well, you have to troubleshoot. I'm going to use the engineering term. We got to find out what's causing the behavior. You see, this is overgeneralization. Now, okay, if it's a nonverbal person, maybe he's frustrated because he can't communicate. I can remember when I was a little kid, I wanted to tell my mother I didn't want to wear this hat, so I decided to chuck it out the window on the highway. It caused a car accident. I'm, not able to communicate. You have to figure out what's causing a baby. Is it sound sensitivity? So a question I'll ask is, well, is it in the middle of the train station they threw this fit? Because that could be sound sensitivity. If it's in a quiet living room, it's probably not sensory overload. You see, now as I'm talking about these things, I see the train station. In fact, I'm now seeing several different train stations. I'm seeing quiet living room we had when I was a child. I'm seeing living room over at a friend's house. It's I have to find out where the behavior's happening. See, the big problem, especially with verbal thinking, is overgeneralization. I get the same problem. We're trying to figure out a dog behavior problem. They'll say, well, my dog just goes crazy. Well, what does it do? Bite people, jump on people? I don't even know what it does yet. I have to have more information. But the sensory stuff, sometimes they can be desensitized by giving the child control. I've talked to several parents where a fear of hair dryers, vacuum cleaners, sirens, things like that, they let the child control the vacuum cleaner, where they control turning the dreaded sound on. And when they got to turn it on and off themselves, several kids actually got to like the vacuum cleaner. See, the important thing is control, which drastically reduces the startle effect. Because there's been research that shows that the sensory circuits in the brain are not wired up right, and a loud sound just sets off all the fear circuits. It's not really very normal, but that's what happens. And sensory issues would be the number one area of research for me if I was paying for research, is treatments for sensory. And there's a paper that you might find useful. It's called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. It's a sensory method where you stimulate two senses at the same time, like maybe touch a cold water glass and listen to music. Then you might smell something and look at some patterns. And you're always changing the different sensory modalities that are stimulated. You need 3 key words to find the paper: autism, environmental, enrichment. And I've just got the new copy of my book, The Way I See It, just updated, a lot of little short chapters. It's also available as an ebook, which makes it easier to ship during COVID.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, if an autistic person has self-injurious behaviors such as headbanging, slapping himself, or biting, what do you think is the best way for a parent or a professional to respond to this?
Well, you got to get self-injury stopped. The first thing you want to rule out is hidden painful medical problem, constipation, stomach aches, heartburn, what we call heartburn, tummy hurts. Might check that out. Try some acid reflux medicine. They've got a toothache. Rule that stuff out. You might find that some sensory integration type things are helpful. Swinging, deep pressure, exercise. A lot of these kids are not getting enough exercise. Maybe loud noises setting it off. You've got to figure out where they're doing it. And when you read some of the the self-reports, like Donna Williams, she described one of her books that sometimes she did it, she self-injured herself. She didn't even know she was doing it because her sensory system was so messed up she couldn't even tell where her body boundary was. The sensory systems aren't working right. That's one of the things that causes that. But the first thing you got to do is, where is it happening? I want to rule out the hidden painful medical problem first. I want to rule that one out. Then, does it happen in a noisy place? Does it happen when he's frustrated because he can't communicate? Well, then give him a way to communicate.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, how would you suggest supporting a child or an adult on the spectrum in regards to social rules, boundaries, and manners?
Well, this is where we need to be looking at, you might say, let's assume the kid's fully verbal. Well, you just teach it the way it was taught in the 50s. We'd sit at the table, and if I reached across and reached for the serving dish with the vegetables in it, mother didn't scream no. She just would say, ask your sister to pass it. She'd give the instruction. One of the things I've noticed is a lot of grandfathers come up to me, and they discover they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. And granddaddy's had a decent job because he had a paper route when he was a kid, and he learned social rules. You see, because in my generation, that stuff was taught in a much more systematic way. And then when it comes to boundaries, you just have to, there's certain rules for stuff. There's some things that has like concentric circles. Okay, people you can hug, people you see every day, like maybe the mail carrier. No, you cannot hug the mail carrier. You just has to be clearly spelled out. I have a rule system I still live with that I developed in high school. If you want to have a civilized society, you can't have really bad things going on. Murder, just wrecking everything, stealing everything. Then you have your courtesy rules. Now, they were drilled into me so hard when I was a young kid, and every other kid in my neighborhood, that I didn't even originally have those in my original rule system. Then you have illegal but not bad. These are rules that you can sometimes break. Like riding a horse in the pasture without permission might be an example of that. And then you have the sins of the system. Boy, these things get you in a pile of trouble. This list is expanding, too. This is stuff you don't touch. And, of course, sex gets into that category. And you've just got to be told, matter-of-factly, certain behaviors, certain websites you go to will get you in a ton of trouble, and you just don't do it. It's a sin of the system. Now, the reason why I call it a sin of the system is something that's a sin of the system in one society may be perfectly legal in another society. All right, let's take something like marijuana, for example, would be an example. It's legal here in my state, in the next state's a felony. Yeah, I don't touch it because I'm afraid I might get it on a plane and get it in another state. But you see, a sin of the system is something that's legal here, big trouble somewhere else. It's society. It's not general. Really bad things is general rule. Then courtesy rules, yeah, they vary. Some in different cultures, but every culture has them.
And Temple, do you think it's useful for people supporting individuals on the spectrum to have an understanding of sensory integration?
Well, yes, and I think there's now a new paper just came out in the last couple of years about the AIRS sensory integration. That is now considered an evidence-based treatment, and for some of the people that like self-abusing themselves, it might be really helpful. And for some people respond really well to deep pressure. I was one of those. Others respond well to balancing activities. Nobody knows why it works, but you do a little balancing activity and it might help with speech. Might work for one kid, it doesn't work for somebody else. See, this is the other big problem. There's a real need to study the sensory problems, but to study them, you've got to divide them up into the type of problem. I did not have visual problems. Okay, kids that are sound sensitive, kids that have visual problems, kids that are touch sensitive, and then study the sensory problems in the individuals that have a particular sensory problem. In my mind, sorting them into a spreadsheet now. In fact, I'm old enough to where I used the old IBM punch cards. We had a mechanical spreadsheet. This is early 70s. And it sorted these cards that look like airline boarding passes into little slots.
And thanks, Temple. So, as you know, Temple, we're in the middle of a world pandemic. Like, what advice would you give to people supporting autistic individuals to minimize their stress and anxiety?
Well, you have to make a new schedule. Now, one of the things I've done is I've studied all the treatments. I've studied the route of admission. It's mostly airborne in tight spaces with a lot of people jammed in it. Treatments, so that if I got it, maybe I would live. Knowing, when I was a child, we had these little notebooks that said knowledge is power. Well, I know every possible treatment for it with over the counter and easy to get prescription drugs, because if I do get it, I'd like to save myself. But on the other hand, I'm going to restaurants where we eat outside, and I'm not going to any big gatherings. I've had to make new book projects to work on because I've got to have stuff to do. I don't want to get in the habit of just endless movies watching or something like that.
And Temple, as you know, the schools are reopening and have opened in most countries. Like, what do you think is the best way to support the individual in the transition back to school?
Let's not have it as a surprise. You don't want them to go back to the school and find out the desks are all spaced apart and they're going to be eating at their desk. You want them to know about that before they get there. No surprises. If there's a way to get some pictures of some of that stuff before they go, that's going to help. Now, the most important kids to get back into school are the primary school kids. That applies to all kids. They're the ones that need to get back to school the best. We got a little nursery school right where I live, and they've got the kids back in that, and I'm going, good, because those kids need that socialization. And what's happening now with the online learning in kids is about a third of the kids that are checking out and not participating. And then there's others that take the online learning. It depends how it's done. I have found online that just canned lectures pretty boring. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this interview format. I got plenty of YouTube videos you can watch that show formal lectures, but I think that works a lot better online.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, how do you think we could best build resilience?
Well, you build resilience by, this is why I get back to having people make things, because This is a book of all my 1950s childhood projects. Because we have kids today that haven't even done something as simple as making a little paper snowflake. I found out when I did that book 2 years ago that about a third or 20% to a third of the kids in Colorado had never made a paper airplane. And kids are really scared about making mistakes. Well, you do hands-on things, you make some mistakes, you're going to have to correct it. I had somebody ask me a question I couldn't believe. I show that paper snowflake, and a teacher asked me on Zoom, well, what's he going to do to the kid's self-esteem if he cuts it wrong and it fell apart? Well, then you get another piece of paper. You get another piece of paper and you try again. And then if that doesn't work, then you show them how to look it up on YouTube. You learn from mistakes. I wrecked a sewing project when I was about 12, 13. I cut the material too fast and I had to throw the whole thing away. We couldn't get more fabric. Be more careful next time. You just have to, try stuff. No, there's a tendency with a lot of these kids, we tend to overprotect them. We don't force them like into some terrible noisy places all of a sudden. But we've got to get them out doing a lot more things. I'm seeing too many parents where I suggested that their kid go in a store and buy some stuff, and the mom started breaking down and crying, saying she couldn't let go. This is a fully verbal kid, good grades in school, never had been in a store to buy anything. That's ridiculous. Wasn't taught anything about money. That's just ridiculous. I was doing those things when I was like 8 years old. I had a little allowance. I knew exactly what I could buy with that little allowance. And that taught saving if I wanted something a little bit more expensive. This is simple kind of stuff. And work skills. Well, they need to be doing, when they're 11 years old, volunteer jobs outside the home on a schedule where somebody else is the boss. Maybe it's walk somebody else's dog or a church volunteer job. And the transition to work has been a real mess. And this is where we need to be making a slow transition to working skills, starting with chores, 11 years old, little thing they do outside the home, a real job of some kind as soon as they can get it. So by the time they graduate from high school, they've already learned how to work. There's sometimes that, you see, for me, this brings up an important thing about identity. And I know we just have a few minutes left here. Autism is secondary to being a scientist. It always has been secondary. It's an important part of who I am. People say, would you snap your fingers and make yourself not autistic? No, I like the logical way I think. I just can't believe how crazy the world's been getting. But it's still secondary to being an animal behavior specialist, to being a scientist, to writing. I'm seeing too many kids also get too hung up on autism. There's things I can't do. Working memory, that's a problem. Well, I just don't have any. But there's a lot of professions where you don't need much working memory.
And Temple, if an autistic individual loves Lego, is this a skill they could develop for employment?
Yes, and if children that play with Legos need to be introduced to tools. In my generation, by the time I was 7 and 8 years old, we were using screwdrivers and pliers and learned how to use them safely. No, kids that like Legos, they need to be introduced to all kinds of other ways to build things. And then maybe a little older, a little hand saw, maybe a little battery-operated drill, and learn how to use it safely. No, they need to be introduced to tools. Because when I was out working on these big construction projects, I'm going to estimate that about 20% of the skilled machinery designers, welders, and some very skilled people, mechanics, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. I know a guy who's undiagnosed autistic, and he's very autistic. He has 20 patents and owned a metal fabrication company. This is the kind of thing that makes me get kind of crazy when I walk back and forth between the commercial industrial world and the autism world. And I've seen some video game addicts have some great success get off of video games when car mechanics was they were shown car mechanics, and all three of them found out fixing cars was more interesting than video games were. Now, the thing that's really good about jobs like car mechanic, heating and air conditioning, plumbing and electrical, and welders that can build anything out of metal where they can read drawings, COVID-proof and recession-proof jobs. Don't stick your nose up at them. They've got jobs. While the restaurant people are laid off, they're going to lay off thousands of employees in the airlines. It's going to be a mess. You won't get laid off if you're the one who fixes cars. Airplane mechanic wouldn't be so good, but that could easily switch over to car mechanic very easily.
Thanks, Temple. And Temple, the importance of acquiring daily living skills is well recognized for everybody. Like, what strategies would you advise from early childhood to adulthood in attaining these skills?
Well, it starts out with sit-down meal, just like a previous speaker talked about the round robin, where you take turns talking. That was standard 50s. You have a sit-down meal. Dinner was our big one. And everybody talked about their day, had to take turns talking, have table manners. If I ate sloppily, I was corrected. That's teaching daily living skills. I was expected to get up, get dressed, and get ready for pickup for school. It's just starting at a very early age. I had an allowance when I was 7. I knew exactly what I could buy with 50 cents. I could buy 5 comics with it, or I could buy a comic and a glider airplane. But if I wanted that propeller airplane, that's 69 cents. I had to save for 2 weeks. Mother didn't buy me that plane. She didn't buy those little trinkets. I was taught how to save. That's a living skill. We had those parties where we had to be the little caterers. The party that taught living skills. That was just done in the neighborhood. And the other thing in the 50s, grown-ups corrected children no matter where you went. Like if I touched too much stuff in the store, or they'd tell me to only touch the things I was going to buy. No, but let's start early on this stuff. And what they did in the 50s, it wasn't mean. We had lots of time to go play and do all kinds of other stuff just on our own too. But then dinner table, that's where we taught social skills.
And Temple, finally, how can we best help autistic individuals feel secure and happy?
Well, I get happiness out of being good at what I do. You're doing something constructive. You have a nonverbal person. One thing that was brought up by the previous speaker was rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Well, you're going to make a nonverbal person really angry and make them throw something if you make them set and unset the table 10 times in a row, because nobody does that in the real world. No, it's time to set the table, you set the table. And you just teach them once. You don't make them just do something over and over again that people don't normally set and unset the table 5 times in a row. And you just work on teaching them. The other thing I've noticed with some of the nonverbals, so I was at a therapeutic writing arena, is there's a tendency to say good job, just constantly. And I found I had to fight that urge. Let's try to interact with this nonverbal kid like I would a normal kid. There was this little 5-year-old. She was nonverbal. I don't know what her diagnosis was. And they had her on a horse, and she was supposed to throw a ball at a traffic cone or something like that. She was mad. And I just talked to her like a normal kid, and I said, well, you chucked the ball. I can't get it. So I ran and I got the ball, and then I faced her, and I said, I'm going to throw the ball to you, and then I'm going to ask you to throw it back. And you're going to be really nice. And I threw the ball, and she caught it, and she threw it back. And I only said good job after she threw it back. But there's a tendency to say good job constantly breaks up the flow of the activity. But I even found myself fighting the urge to say it. Now you do sometimes want to say it, but not for every move that she makes is right. No, and the little girl responded. I remember a nonverbal boy, and I got him to take the bridle off the horse, and then there was a sliding door on the stall, and I just went like this. And he shut the door. I made a motion. It was the motion of the door. I mean, doing something, because I didn't know whether he understood speech or not. But there's a tendency that I just try to treat them more like normal interaction. No, you're supposed to shut the stall door, so I just went like that.
Thanks so much, Temple, for your time. It was a real pleasure chatting with you. So we're just going to move into the panel Q&A with Bo and also Paula. So you're just going to get set up. It'll probably take about a minute or two there, just with Steve, to set us all up on the screen there. So thanks again, Temple.
Okay. Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. This is Bo, and this is Paula down the other side of the screen there, Temple.
Okay.
Great. So and just kind of quick reminder to the audience, just to state your name when you're asking the question and try to make it as brief as possible, and who the question is directed to. Is it directed to everyone on the panel or a specific person on the panel as well? Thanks so much. So just to get us started, I have a few questions registered with the conference. And the first question actually is to Bo, and it says, how important is the environment and the people in it when a person has a behavior of concern?
Extremely important. I mean, yeah. What my talk was about environment, but you can talk about the environment as the physical environment. You can talk about it as an emotional environment, and you can talk about it as the people around it. And I do believe that it is not a behavior of concern if there's nobody there. I mean, it's only a problem for the environment. Often it's not a problem for the person. So, of course, it's extremely important, both understanding the behavior, but also, of course, to change it, because we interact, even people with autism interact a lot with the society around them, and behavior always occurs in the connection with the environment. So it's 100%.
Thanks, Bo. And there's a question there for Paula. How do you promote independence?
Oh God, that's a very big question. I think really it would be good to know from that participant what stage of independence. Is it a young child, an adolescent, or an adult? Because I think the response will vary hugely. And Temple, you're nodding your head there as well. You would agree. So if you want to ask another question and that person can come back
I sure will. No problem.
That's great. Thanks.
So there's another question here as well. How do you support a person to make their needs known, especially if they're non-verbal, Paula?
I think a lot of it would depend on the age for a start. And